The headlights from the cruiser glared in the side mirror, piercing the darkness that had fallen over a quiet stretch of Tennessee backroads. Roberta Flack, who teased so many times about sharing her name with the famous singer, gripped the wheel of her rental car more tightly, knuckles whitening in the harsh reflection. She was on vacation with her husband, Grant Flack, just a long weekend to escape their relentless jobs in Raleigh. They'd heard about a scenic route that wove through old farmland and gentle hills, with a cozy inn at the end, the perfect stop before continuing to Nashville the following day. But now the abrupt, shrill flash of red and blue lights hammered at her nerves, telling her they might never see that inn tonight at all. She glanced at Grant, who'd been calmly scrolling through his phone for directions moments before the sirens came alive. He was a tall, quietly authoritative man, always composed, rarely startled. But even in the dim interior of the car, she saw tension in the lines around his mouth. This was no ordinary traffic stop. Something about the way the lights danced behind them, combined with that creeping sense of dread in her gut, made it all feel wrong. "Pull over," Grant said softly, as though trying not to alarm her. "Don't do anything sudden, honey." Roberta nodded, signaling and edging onto the roadside gravel, heart thrumming. She'd encountered routine stops before, burnt-out taillights or an expired tag, the usual. But she'd never felt this brand of foreboding that snaked up her spine now. Perhaps it was the remote location, with no passing headlights for miles, or perhaps it was a flicker of something more primal, a sense that the uniformed men stepping out of that patrol car were looking for an excuse to escalate. She rolled down her window partway. The first officer, stocky, with a jaw so clenched it looked painful, approached. He aimed his flashlight in her eyes, harsh enough that it stung. "License and registration," he ordered, voice clipped. "No courtesy, ma'am. No explanation for the stop." Roberta forced a polite smile, adrenaline spiking. "Officer, can I ask what this is about?" she managed. Her voice betrayed a tremor that Grant likely noticed but hoped the officer did not. The policeman's glare cut through the gloom. "License and registration," he repeated, ignoring her question. Next to him, a second officer, taller, wiry, hung back with a matching scowl. The tension radiating from them was tangible, as though they decided these travelers warranted extra suspicion. Roberta retrieved the documents from the glove compartment, handing them over. The officer snatched them, glancing from the license to her face with an expression that slid quickly from disinterest to something like disdain. He shot a look at Grant in the passenger seat, then back at Roberta. The name Flack might have rung a bell, or perhaps it was purely the color of her skin that triggered his hostility. She couldn't be sure. But in that moment, she felt singled out in ways that had nothing to do with traffic safety. The officer muttered something about checking for warrants, marching back to his cruiser. The second officer circled to Grant's window, shining a beam inside. Grant lowered it an inch, but his calm had turned cold. She saw his jaw flex, an old sign that told her he was reining in the urge to speak. He was used to controlling precarious situations, though rarely for personal reasons like this. "You folks sure are a long way from home," the second cop said, tone brimming with condescension. Grant forced a mild shrug. "We're on vacation, passing through." "That right? Passing through?" the officer echoed as though testing the phrase in his mouth. He squinted at Grant's face, then at Roberta. "Why come this way? It's off the beaten path." "Scenic route," Roberta replied, thinking to diffuse. But the policeman's stare pinned her in place, a quick, scornful once-over eye, and he arched a brow as if she'd spoken nonsense. "Scenic route, sure," he sneered quietly, stepping back. The tension escalated. She didn't like the way his hand lingered near his belt, or the way he signaled to his partner with a small nod. Minutes trickled by. Eventually, the first officer returned to the driver's window. "Step out of the car, ma'am." Roberta's pulse pounded. "Is there an issue, officer? Something wrong with my paperwork?" "Step out of the car," he repeated, each word clipped, ignoring the question. She exchanged a brief look with Grant, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She unclicked her seatbelt, exhaled, and carefully opened the door. Gravel crunched under her shoes as she stood, the night air unexpectedly cold against her arms. She felt more exposed under the swirling red-blue lights, as if she were on a stage with a hateful audience. That sense of danger gnawed her stomach. The second officer circled around, indicating for Grant to do the same. "Both of you out," the second officer barked, stepping close to the passenger side. Grant complied, slipping out with careful movements. He was no small man, but he moved slowly, projecting no threat. She suspected that if these cops wanted an excuse for violence, they'd seize it. The short, stocky officer, call him Officer Hicks, based on the small embroidered name, directed Roberta to the trunk, while the wiry partner, presumably Officer Turner, took Grant to the hood. She swallowed, uncertain if they intended to search or arrest them outright. Her breath came faster, heart hammering. She heard the faint, low rumble of crickets beyond the road. No passing cars, no immediate witnesses. A shiver of real fear passed through her. Hicks loomed over her. "Bag or weapons in that trunk?" he asked, words laced with scorn. "We only have luggage. Clothes," Roberta said, forcing composure. "We're traveling. That's it." He huffed, unimpressed, and demanded the trunk keys. She fumbled them out, her hands trembling. He popped it open, rummaging inside without care, rifling through her neatly folded outfits. Meanwhile, she glimpsed Officer Turner patting Grant down, pulling at his jacket. She heard Turner's aggressive tone. "Think you're special, wearing a fancy watch like that?" Grant's voice, though controlled, carried an edge. "It's just a watch. We're tourists, that's all." From the corner of her eye, Roberta saw Hicks turning over her suitcase, scattering personal items, a shampoo bottle rolling onto the gravel, the humiliating sense of rummaging through her underwear. "What exactly are you looking for?" she demanded, some indignation creeping into her tone. Fear still riddled her, but outrage flared at the blatant harassment. Hicks' scowl deepened. "Looking for contraband, obviously. Maybe you folks are smuggling. Don't matter, we'll find out." She bristled, forced to hold her tongue. She'd read about people in situations like this, how a single spark of anger could escalate to violence. She was no fool. She needed them to come away unscathed. They could file a complaint after, if that even meant anything in a place like this. But a voice in her head asked, "Are these truly rogue cops, or is there a bigger reason they singled us out?" Over by the hood, Grant's expression grew stonier as Turner shoved him. "Hey, watch yourself," the officer snarled. "You keep talking back, we'll bring you in for resisting." Grant inhaled, exhaling slowly. Then, in a measured voice, he said, "Officer, I believe you're overstepping. We have done nothing wrong." Turner's face twisted in an ugly smirk. "Overstepping? A guy like you passing through our territory in the dead of night makes me think you're up to no good." Grant glanced at Roberta, sending a silent reassurance. But inside, she recognized the flicker in his eyes, a hidden reservoir of calm he'd perfected long ago, in a different life. Sometimes she'd teased him for that mysterious streak, but never had it felt more essential than now. Officer Hicks slammed the trunk shut. "Nothing here but clothes," he grumbled, disappointed. He pivoted to face Roberta again, sizing her up. "We'll see about your ID. Might be fake. People do that." Her frustration shot higher. "It's not fake," she said, mustering an even tone. "You can run it again. Check with the county clerk or the state, for all I care." He sneered, leaning forward, voice dropping. "You watch that mouth, miss. We don't take kindly to your kind, driving fancy cars around small towns. Think you can do what you like?" At that, Roberta's blood chilled. "My kind!" The bigoted implication was unmistakable. She forced herself not to tremble. "We're just a married couple on a trip. That's all." Hicks jabbed a finger near her face, not quite touching but deeply invasive. "Don't talk back. I can arrest you for disturbing the peace if I want." Before she could retort, a second siren flared up behind them. Another patrol car, or so it seemed. But to her surprise, the lights that emerged from the gloom were not the standard black and white pattern. Instead, a sleek, dark SUV pulled up, headlights cutting across the roadside. The sound of the engine was distinct, more polished. The occupant stepped out, a man in plain clothes, his posture exuding authority. She couldn't see his face clearly yet, but the new arrival's calm stride radiated confidence. Grant and Roberta exchanged a swift look. Hope? Fear? Hard to name. Maybe a sheriff or a higher authority. Possibly more trouble. The two local officers tensed, turning toward the figure. Hicks barked, "Who's there?" The man approached, flashing a small wallet badge. "Agent Jackson, FBI," he announced quietly, though with a presence that commanded immediate attention. "Everything all right here, officers?" A hush fell. Hicks shot Turner a confused look as if to say, "Why is the FBI here?" Turner cleared his throat. "These folks are under suspicion of, well, something. We're verifying." Agent Jackson's gaze shifted to Roberta, to Grant, then to the rummaged trunk, the scattered luggage. Suspicion of what, precisely? His voice remained mild, but she heard the steel edge beneath it. Grant, arms pinned behind him by Turner, locked eyes with Jackson. Something flickered in Grant's expression, recognition or relief, but he said nothing. Meanwhile, Hicks tried to speak, but was cut off by a ring from Grant's phone, still in the car. The shrill tone made them all jump. Roberta realized the phone must be someone important, maybe an FBI contact. She felt a surge of adrenaline. Could they be saved by some timely call? But Hicks snarled, "Shut that phone off!" "Don't move!" He glared at Grant as though daring him to defy the order. Agent Jackson stepped forward. "Might be wise to answer it," he suggested, voice deceptively calm. "Never know if it's an urgent matter, especially if the gentleman has official duties." Hicks frowned, uncertain. "Official duties? These two? They're just—" He trailed off, perhaps noticing the intense calm in Agent Jackson's face, or the fact that Grant's shoulders squared slightly at the words, "official duties." She saw the puzzle pieces align in Hicks' mind, but he refused to accept them. "Look, I don't know who you are, buddy, but we run this county. If you're FBI, you can go back to the city or wherever you belong." Jackson let out a quiet, sardonic laugh. "I appreciate your viewpoint, officer, but if you're interfering with federal matters, we might have a bigger conversation about jurisdiction." A tremor of indignation passed through Hicks and Turner. She recognized the old turf war dynamic, but also these men reeked of prejudice. Perhaps they were involved in something shady, or they simply hated seeing perceived outsiders. Regardless, their defiance was about to crash into a wall. Agent Jackson seemed unimpressed. Meanwhile, her heart soared at the possibility that Grant was not as powerless as these bullies believed. She already suspected Grant had some hidden capacity, though he rarely brandished it. Could he be an active agent in some capacity? She thought she knew him. He'd mentioned bureau connections, but she'd never pried. Now everything felt precarious. Jackson continued, "I think it's time you release these individuals. They clearly pose no threat, and your probable cause for this stop is questionable at best." Hicks scowled, shooting a glance at Turner. "We don't take orders from an out-of-jurisdiction Fed. We can handle." But just then, the phone in the car stopped ringing, only to start again, more insistently. The tension ramped up. Hicks turned, glaring at the vehicle. Roberta's breath came shallow, that ring like an alarm in the night. She realized this was some pivot point. If they defied Jackson, everything could blow up in chaos. Grant cleared his throat, voice calm yet charged. "Officer, let me answer that. It could clarify everything you question. Then we can all go our separate ways." Turner's grip on him eased, uncertain. Meanwhile, Hicks seemed to fight an internal battle. Finally, with a disgusted snort, he jerked his head at the car. "Fine, grab it. Let's see who's so eager to talk to you." Grant walked carefully to the front seat, retrieved his phone from the console. The name on the screen wasn't visible from Roberta's angle, but Grant's posture told her it was important. He swiped, lifted it to his ear. "Yes, sir," he said softly after a moment. Then, after listening, "We're in the middle of a roadside matter. Possibly you should speak to the local officers." He extended the phone to Hicks, who scowled suspiciously. "What is this nonsense?" Hicks growled. "I'm not." Grant's voice hardened. "It's your superiors. Perhaps you should be polite." The sarcasm stung Hicks' pride, but he took the phone, pressed it to his ear. "Hello, this is Officer Hicks. Who?" He paused, eyes widening. Roberta guessed the voice on the other end carried real weight. Hicks sputtered, "Yes, sir." "No, sir. We were just, I see." He shot a hateful glare at Grant. "Understood." Then he hung up, the phone shaking slightly in his grip. For an instant, he looked cornered. Turner whispered, "What the hell? Who was that?" Hicks thrust the phone back at Grant, color drained from his cheeks. "You can go," he spat, "but don't step foot in my county again." Grant took the phone calmly. Roberta sensed the dread in the officers, as if they'd realized they were messing with someone who outranked them in the bigger scheme. Jackson, the FBI agent, smirked faintly. "That's wise. Now let them gather their belongings and be on their way." The two local cops said nothing. They withdrew to their cruiser, shooting venomous looks over their shoulders. Hicks slammed the door, turned off the lights, and sped off in a swirl of dust, as though fleeing their own mistake. Roberta inhaled a shaky breath, relief mixing with leftover adrenaline. Grant turned to Jackson, offering a measured nod. "Thanks for stepping in." Jackson studied him with a hint of wariness. "I was passing through, saw the commotion. Funny how often folks from out of state get harassed on these roads." Then, leaning closer, "But I suspect you have your own resources. That phone call, someone high up?" Grant's expression gave little away. "Yes, an old contact. Let's leave it at that." Jackson didn't press. He gave them a business card. "If you need to file a formal complaint, let me know. I do liaison work in these counties." He then parted with a short wave, returning to his SUV. Within moments, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving the two vacationers on the roadside with their rummaged trunk. Roberta sagged against the car, hands trembling. "Grant, my God, I thought they'd—" She couldn't finish. She recalled the venom in the cop's eyes, the humiliating rummage. Grant placed a soothing hand on her shoulder. "It's over, for now." She stared at him, heart swirling. "So that phone call, are you? I never fully asked about your background." It was a clumsy question, but a natural one. They'd been married only a year, and he was always discreet about old FBI ties, describing it as some consulting. He'd never boasted. Now she realized the scope might be bigger. He exhaled. "Yes, I'm still connected. I keep it quiet. It's safer that way. Didn't want you caught up in it." He rubbed her arm gently. "But tonight forced my hand." She processed that. "So those officers had no idea you had resources that outranked them. Still, they nearly escalated. Why? Just racism or something else?" Grant's gaze turned pensive. "Racism is part of it, but I suspect a deeper rot in local law enforcement. Corruption, maybe. Agent Jackson's presence was more than coincidence. Let's keep our guard up." They spent a few minutes retrieving scattered clothes from the trunk, folding them back, though many items were dusty or crumpled. She felt tears threaten, tears of anger, fear, frustration. This was supposed to be a relaxing trip. Instead, they were almost assaulted by cops with hateful motives. Yet the bigger question loomed. Who was truly behind that phone call, stepping in to protect them? And why did Grant's status remain half secret? She decided not to grill him further right there, on that lonely stretch of highway. They had to find safe lodging, get some rest, and talk. So they climbed back into the car. The battered hush of night enveloped them. Her hands shook as she started the engine. Grant quietly guided her to the next main route, leading to the inn. She felt an intangible shift, some hidden storm waiting for them on the horizon. The inn was a modest two-story building lit by a single neon sign. The elderly owner welcomed them with sleepy politeness, not noticing their shaken demeanor. They hauled their half-ruined luggage up to a small room. Only once inside, door locked, did Roberta slump on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her palms. Grant placed a hand on her back, gently kneading away tension. "That was too close," she whispered. "Grant, they could have killed us." He nodded, voice tight. "I know, I'm sorry. I wanted to remain off their radar, but they singled us out. We must be cautious tomorrow. These men might hold a grudge, or others in the county might be part of something bigger." She raised her head. "Something bigger, you keep saying? You think they're connected to a ring or a conspiracy?" He sighed. "I can't confirm, but I suspect a pipeline of corruption, contraband, or illicit trades. I'd heard rumors. This area is known as a corridor for certain illegal traffic. Those cops might be either complicit or on the payroll." She swallowed. "Hence the aggression. They worried we'd seen something?" He nodded. "It's possible. Anyway, let's rest. Tomorrow we'll decide if we continue or head back." But she saw the flicker in his eyes. He disliked backing down. She recognized the FBI agent side of him stirring, wanting to investigate. She also recognized the fear that they might get entangled deeper. For now, they were safe behind the inn's locked door. They bedded down, though sleep came fitfully. She dreamt of swirling red-blue lights, rancid scowls, sinister men in uniforms. She jolted awake at 2 a.m., heart pounding, the memory of that hateful voice. "We don't like your kind." A wave of anger overcame the fear. She resolved not to let them win. If Grant needed her support, she'd muster it. At dawn, they rose. Over a sparse breakfast in the inn's small dining area, they quietly discussed next steps. "We could quietly slip out of this county, avoid trouble," Grant mused. But the question is, do we want to let them keep doing it to others? Roberta's eyes narrowed. We can't fix every racist cop, but maybe your superiors can put them on a watch list, or we push for an official inquiry? He nodded. Yes, I'll phone a contact after we check out. Let them handle the bigger net. We're on vacation after all. Yet the tension in his jaw told her he wasn't fully letting go. They paid, loaded the car, and set off, heading south. The main road was empty, farmland stretching in the morning light. She felt relieved with each mile that distanced them from the roadhouse confrontation. Then Grant's phone buzzed. He answered quietly, speaking in that guarded tone. She caught fragments. Yes, last night. They pulled us over. No injuries. Of course, I can help. He hung up, met her questioning gaze. That was Agent Lewis. They want me to come by a field office in the next county, discuss last night's events. Possibly they found a pattern of complaints about those deputies. Her heart sank, though she admired his sense of duty. We'll go? He offered a half smile. We'll see. If you're up for a detour, might be wise to document this incident thoroughly, so it's not just our word against theirs. She took a breath, mind swirling. Part of her wanted to bury it, continue their trip to Nashville, forget. But the deeper moral sense told her they had an obligation. Let's do it. We might prevent them from harming others. So they turned west, following the directions to a small city where the FBI had a modest satellite office. The building was brick, nondescript. They parked, feeling the swirl of tension return as they approached the tinted glass doors. A stony-faced receptionist led them to a back conference room. Agent Lewis, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, greeted them. He shook Grant's hand with professional familiarity, then introduced himself to Roberta with measured courtesy. They recounted the stop, each detail, from the vile sneers to rummaging the trunk. Lewis listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. Then he exhaled. We've had multiple complaints from travelers along that highway. The local sheriff's department claims ignorance, but we suspect a ring of about 4 or 5 deputies systematically harassing certain motorists, sometimes extorting money or other valuables. Possibly racial profiling is part of it, but it might also tie to smuggling or contraband operations. Hard to confirm. Roberta frowned. So they're criminals in uniform? Lewis nodded grimly. Essentially. We haven't pinned them yet because they're cunning and local politics hamper investigations. The sheriff denies wrongdoing. We needed a credible witness, possibly someone with standing to push a bigger inquiry. Grant's partial status with the Bureau helps. She realized how precarious this was. The men who threatened them were linked to something broader. If the FBI needed a scapegoat or a secret infiltration, might they rope Grant in deeper? Anxiety rose. She squeezed her husband's hand under the table. He responded with a gentle squeeze back, signaling reassurance. Lewis continued, If you're willing, we can file a formal statement. That might let us expedite a sting or at least bring them under direct watch. But it won't be risk-free. They might retaliate. Grant sat straighter. We'll do it. They almost arrested us for nothing. This can't stand. We'll see it through, right, Ro? Roberta inhaled. Yes, we can't let them keep terrorizing people. Let's do it. Lewis gave a tight, approving smile. Thank you. We'll keep your names out of the local press, but I can't guarantee total anonymity. If we proceed with official charges, your testimony might be needed. I'll do my best to ensure your safety. Over the next hour, they provided detailed accounts describing the officers' physical traits, the vehicles, the nature of their intimidation. Roberta found it draining, yet cathartic. She recounted how the cops singled them out with hateful remarks, rummaging personal items. Meanwhile, Grant explained that phone call from the previous night, how a higher-up intervened. He withheld some specifics about his own clandestine position. Lewis, evidently aware of the need for secrecy, didn't pry. When finished, Lewis escorted them to the corridor. We'll keep you posted, but it might take time. If you're continuing your vacation, just be mindful. If anything suspicious occurs, call me. He handed them an unassuming contact card. They parted with subdued thanks. Outside, the midday sun was bright. Roberta felt the weight in her chest lighten a fraction. She'd done something. They had allies. She glanced at Grant, who gazed back with a faint smile that said, We'll be all right. They resumed their trip, heading for a new route that bypassed that hateful county. She tried to relax, tried focusing on the fact that soon they'd be in Nashville, enjoying music, good food. But an undercurrent of tension remained. Are we truly safe? Could those cops find us again? Nightfall approached as they neared the city. They booked a hotel near the outskirts. This time, the check-in was uneventful, no suspicious stares. They dined in the lobby restaurant, forcing small talk about anything but the near arrest. Gradually, her shoulders eased. At midnight, her phone buzzed, startling them both. She picked up with an unsteady hello, expecting maybe a friend from back home. Instead, a low, half-masked voice murmured, "You think we don't know where you are? Stay out of it, or you'll regret it." Then a click. She jolted up, fear pounding. Grant, instantly alert, demanded, "Who was that?" She relayed the message, her voice trembling. "It was them, I'm sure. They know we talked to the FBI." Grant cursed softly. He dialed Lewis's number, but it went to voicemail. They left an urgent message about the threat. The rest of the night, she barely slept, mind spinning. If they had resources to track them, maybe they had local contacts. The idea of continuing a carefree vacation was laughable now. Morning came. No response from Lewis yet. Grant took a call in the hallway, presumably from another bureau contact. He returned, jaw set. "We're not safe. Let's see if we can find a safer location or request protective detail." "Protective detail? Is it that serious?" she whispered, stomach twisting. "I thought we just gave statements." He nodded grimly. "Yes, but these guys are brazen. We might have stumbled into a bigger nest of corruption." The message was a direct threat. So they packed swiftly, checking out. Grant made calls, but time passed with no immediate solution. The FBI might shuffle them into a local safe house or might advise them to cut the trip short. They sat in the hotel lounge, anxious. Then a text from Lewis. "Meet me at the Federal Building, 2nd floor, 3 p.m. Do not move around alone." That was hours from now. Roberta's heart hammered as they realized they had to kill time until the appointment, but leaving themselves in the open risked being followed. They decided to drive to a well-lit popular cafe near the Federal Building, remain in public. The fear of being alone was intense. They found a corner booth, ordered coffee, speaking in hushed tones about the bizarre turn of events. She tried to lighten the mood. "This is the worst vacation ever." He gave a wry laugh, but the tension remained. Halfway through her latte, a chill slid down her neck. She glimpsed a figure in the reflection of the cafe's window, a man wearing a baseball cap, standing near the entrance, seemingly glancing their way. She nudged Grant. "We're being watched," she murmured, forcing a calm expression. He discreetly turned, verifying. "Yes, could be. Let's head out." They paid, stepped onto the busy street. The man followed at a distance. She felt panic rising. In her peripheral, she noticed him speaking into a phone, face partially obscured. They slipped into a crowded block of shops. He followed. "Grant," she hissed, "we need an exit plan." Grant quietly answered, "We'll circle around to the Federal Building early. We can't lead him there if that's an official location. Let's try to lose him." They hastened, weaving through side streets. The man remained, occasionally vanishing, reappearing. It felt like a cat-and-mouse chase in broad daylight. Her adrenaline soared. Then an unexpected black sedan turned onto the street, tinted windows reminding her of the prior night. She froze, but Grant took her hand, half pulling her behind a line of parked cars. The black sedan slowed, scanning. She glimpsed a driver's profile. Not the same cops, but possibly an associate. Fear hammered her chest. The couple ducked into a small bookstore, pressing behind shelves. She heard the sedan drive on. The man on foot presumably was still around. She forced back tears, cursing the situation. Why were these people so determined? Because they'd exposed the cops? Grant whispered, "We can't outrun them forever. Let me see if any local FBI agent can escort us." He tried phoning contacts, voice hushed. Meanwhile, she peeked outside, heart pounding. The man in the cap walked by, scanning the store's window. She held her breath. Eventually, he moved on. She exhaled. 10 minutes later, Grant ended the call. "Lewis is sending an agent to meet us near the library a few blocks away. We can get a ride to the Federal Building." They braced themselves, left the bookstore, hugging building edges, scanning for watchers. The midday city bustle gave them partial cover. They reached the library steps in about 10 minutes. Her nerves jangled. She spotted a plain sedan with a single occupant who gave a subtle wave. They hustled over. The occupant was a middle-aged woman, dark hair pinned up, wearing a crisp blazer. "Agent Tasha Ray," she introduced. "Hop in quick." They slid into the back seat, relief flooding. She drove them to a secure parking structure near the federal building's side entrance. The difference in environment was stark. No suspicious watchers, official guards. She led them through a side elevator to the second floor, where Agent Lewis waited, looking harried. He ushered them into a glass-walled conference room. Lewis spoke urgently. "We suspect those local cops are connected to a bigger ring, smuggling or contraband, possibly with a pipeline involving unscrupulous law enforcement in multiple counties. They see you as a threat. They want to silence you. This is more than prejudice. It's criminal enterprise." Roberta's head spun. "But we just gave a statement. Why target us so aggressively?" Lewis grimaced. "They fear you or your husband might blow the operation wide open, especially if your husband has FBI ties. They must suspect he's investigating them. The threat calls confirm they're spooked." Grant asked, "So what's next?" Lewis inhaled. "We can place you both in protective custody short term, or we can escort you safely out of state. But if you're willing to help us gather more intel, we might stage an op to catch them in the act. That's dangerous, though." Roberta's chest tightened. Her eyes flicked to Grant. She never signed up for infiltration. She only wanted a peaceful getaway. Grant's expression showed conflict, duty versus safety. She found her voice trembling slightly. We want to be safe. Is it necessary for us to engage further?" Lewis considered. "No, not necessary. We can handle the sting ourselves. But your eyewitness testimony is invaluable. Flack, and if your husband's an active or former agent, he has unique vantage. Up to you. For now, let's relocate you to a safe house tonight while we finalize a plan." She nodded, though anxiety fluttered. "Yes, safe house is fine." She didn't want to be in the crosshairs. But a part of her also felt stubbornly determined that these criminals not get away with terrorizing travelers. Lewis signaled Agent Ray, who escorted them out. They spent the rest of the day finalizing statements, signing official forms. By evening, they were whisked to a modest house on the outskirts of the city, unmarked, with a discreet security detail. They bunked there, tension running high. They texted family vague excuses about changing travel plans. That night, as they tried to rest on the safe house's small couch, the swirling knowledge of a far-reaching ring of corrupt cops left them uneasy. "We could vanish back home tomorrow," she murmured. "Pretend this never happened." Grant cradled her face, voice gentle. "If we do that, these men keep hurting more people. I feel obligated with the authority I have to see this through." Tears pricked her eyes. She didn't want him endangered, yet she admired his moral stand. "All right," she whispered. "We'll do it together, but please be careful." He nodded, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. In that moment, overshadowed by fear, their bond felt stronger. She thought of an old quote her grandmother used to share: "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." She latched onto that for comfort. Morning arrived with a hush. Agent Ray briefed them. The FBI was planning a sting to catch the corrupt cops red-handed. They wanted to use a traveler as bait. Possibly they'd wire Grant, have him drive a route known for these stops. The idea chilled Roberta, but she recognized the tactic's logic. Lewis spelled out the plan at midday. "We have intel they intercept certain vehicles at night along a remote county road. They're possibly shaking down motorists or searching for contraband. If you drive that route, we can monitor from hidden vantage points. Once they move, we swoop in." Her stomach coiled. "You want me along?" Lewis shrugged. "Up to you. Safer if you're not, but it might appear suspicious if he's alone. Or we have an agent pose as his wife, but that might not be as convincing if they already saw your faces. Hard to say." She and Grant exchanged glances. She inhaled, deciding, "I'll do it. We started this together. I won't let him drive alone, but we want ample backup, right?" Lewis gave a tight smile. "Absolutely. We'll position multiple teams. They won't get near you without us intervening. The key is letting them reveal themselves, gather incriminating evidence." Thus, that evening, they found themselves in a borrowed sedan, tinted windows removed to avoid suspicion. They wore small concealed mics, while unmarked FBI vehicles fanned out behind them at a distance. The tension was suffocating, every nerve on edge. She recalled the trauma of that first stop, how threatened she'd felt. Now they were purposely diving back into that scenario. She forced herself to remember the good cause. They cruised the designated stretch of highway, farmland silhouettes looming in the twilight. Sunset glowed orange across the horizon, giving way to dusk. Her pulse hammered. Next to her, Grant's calm exterior belied how much was at stake. She suspected he was rehearsing how to handle each possible scenario. She prayed the FBI backup was truly near enough. Minutes turned to a half hour of anxious driving. Nothing happened. Then, nearing a bend in the road, headlights flared behind them, speeding up. Her heart jumped. She glanced at the side mirror. A cruiser, or at least it looked like one. The overhead bar lights remained off, but the shape was distinct. Grant murmured to the hidden mic, "We have a possible tail, folks." The radio earpiece crackled with Lewis' hushed reply, "We see them. Stay cool." She forced slow breaths. The cruiser inched closer, riding their bumper. Then the dreaded red-blue lights erupted, reflecting across the rear glass. Her chest constricted. "It's happening," she whispered. Her mouth went dry. She felt Grant gently squeeze her knee in reassurance. He slowed, pulling onto the shoulder. The cruiser followed. A swirl of memory overcame her, similar to that first night, though now part of a sting. She could barely remain composed. They turned off the engine, waiting. She spotted silhouettes behind those swirling lights, possibly the same two men, or maybe new faces. She forced herself to trust the FBI's promise that help was seconds away. A door slammed behind them. Footsteps approached. "Hands on the dash," a harsh voice commanded. Indeed, a voice she recognized. Officer Hicks, the short, stocky policeman from before. Her stomach twisted in alarm. He was here. That meant the second officer, Turner, might be around too. Grant complied, placing his hands atop the steering wheel. She lifted hers onto the dash. The plan was to remain docile, let Hicks do his intimidation. Agents would swoop in for the arrest. But everything hinged on perfect timing. "License," Hicks barked, shining the flashlight aggressively. Roberta's heart hammered. "Sure," Grant replied, retrieving it slowly. She glimpsed a flicker of hatred in Hicks' eyes upon seeing Grant's face. "You again," Hicks snarled. "Didn't I warn you to stay out of my county?" Grant kept calm. "We're just passing." "Didn't realize." Hicks cut him off. "Shut it. You're under suspicion. Step out, both of you." Another figure, presumably Turner, approached her side, yanking open the door. She stifled a yelp. They repeated the humiliating process, forcing them out, patting them down. She cast a frantic glance at the dark fields around them. Where was the FBI backup? Turner hissed, "You just don't learn, do you? Should have left and never come back. Now we'll handle you proper." Grant tried to maintain composure. "Officer, you're making a mistake. Smack." Turner shoved him roughly. She gasped. Hicks rummaged Grant's jacket pockets, ignoring protests. "We don't abide troublemakers." She braced for the FBI to spring in, but no sign yet. Her panic rose. Could the backup be too far? Suddenly, Hicks pulled out Grant's concealed mic. She froze. The mic glinted in the flashlight. Hicks' eyes widened in fury. "A wire, you bastard!" He tossed it down, stamping on it with savage force. The realization that the sting might be compromised hit them hard. She felt a wave of dread. Grant tried to spin a quick lie, but Hicks, livid, jabbed a finger in his chest. "You set us up, huh? Thought you'd trap us. That's it. We're done playing nice." Her terror peaked, certain these men might kill them to bury the evidence. She prayed the FBI was close. As if in answer, headlights cut across the darkness, multiple vehicles pulling up fast, sirens wailing. Hicks spun, cursing. Turner jerked out his gun, pointing it at Grant, who froze. Heart in throat, she watched as a half-dozen agents poured out, weapons drawn, shouting for the cops to drop their guns. Chaos erupted. Hicks and Turner tried to scramble back. Hicks grabbed at her, using her as a shield. She cried out, pinned by his arm across her chest. The swirling lights from the newcomers, shouts of "FBI freeze!" roiled in the night. She saw Grant clench fists, powerless to move without risking her safety. Then an authoritative voice boomed, "Let the woman go, now!" She recognized it as Lewis. Over the scuffle, she glimpsed his form in tactical gear. He advanced steadily. Hicks, panting, gun trembling, spat curses. "You set me up, you piece of." He glared at Grant, but in that flicker of hesitation, Turner realized they were outgunned, surrounded. There was no escape. Slowly, he let the gun sag. Hicks, faced with overwhelming force, scowled, letting go of Roberta. She stumbled free, racing to Grant's side. The FBI swarmed, disarming both cops. Furious, Hicks barked, "You have no right," but they twisted him around, cuffing him. Turner endured the same. The scene felt surreal, a flurry of triumphant adrenaline. She clung to Grant, breath shaking. Lewis stepped forward, voice cold. "We have plenty of rights. You're under arrest for conspiracy, harassment, civil rights violations. The list goes on. We've been on to you for a while." Hicks glared murderously at Grant. "You think you've won, but you don't know the half of it." The threat hung in the air. Then the agents hauled him off, ignoring his rant. One agent radioed for local backup that was honest. Another patted Roberta's shoulder gently. "It's over now. You're safe." She exhaled, eyes flooding with tears. Grant turned to her, placing a trembling hand on her cheek. "It's done. You're all right." She nodded, relief surging. They delivered the evidence, caught the men red-handed. The overshadowing fear that these cops would remain unstoppable had dissolved into the hum of official arrests. She realized the fight might not be fully over. There could be more complicit officers, a bigger network. But for tonight, she and Grant had survived, and the corrupt duo who targeted them was in custody. She felt a rush of gratitude for the men and women in unmarked vests who stepped in just in time. As the flurry of official procedure began, Miranda warnings, confiscating weapons, she leaned on Grant's shoulder. He pressed a kiss to her hair. She recalled the old saying, "Justice may be delayed, but never denied." They had faced unthinkable intimidation, but the tide had turned. An hour later, they stood near a cluster of FBI vehicles, debriefing with Lewis. The golden haze of headlights lit the patch of gravel where the final confrontation had occurred. She tasted the tang of relief on her tongue. Lewis offered them a tired but satisfied grin. "We'll do a deeper investigation into the entire operation. You two should probably head to a safer location for the night. We'll coordinate protective detail if needed." Grant nodded. "Thank you for the swift action. Could have turned ugly. Actually, it did, but we're glad no one got killed." He looked at Roberta, warmth in his eyes. "We can finally take a real vacation now?" She let out a half laugh, half sob, leaning her head on his arm. "Vacation? We might choose a safer route. But yes, please, something calm after all this." Lewis smirked. "I can't guarantee calm, but at least this county's getting a purge. We owe you for your cooperation." A hush settled. She and Grant parted ways with the FBI caravan. The night sky stretched overhead, infinite. In the hush, only the rustle of farmland in the breeze, the chirp of insects. She realized, ironically, that this was the scenic route they'd wanted, only overshadowed by a harrowing side of corruption. Now that truth had surfaced, maybe the region would find healing too. They loaded into their borrowed sedan again, leaning on each other's presence for strength. The gloom receded into a sense of victory. Roberta turned the key, engine purring. She mused aloud. "When we set out for a restful trip, we never guessed we'd bust a ring of racist cops." Grant squeezed her hand. "Life's unpredictable, but we stood up for ourselves and for others who might have faced the same. That matters." She nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "Matters a lot. Next time we pick a route, let's check the not-so-corrupt reviews, okay?" A shaky laugh escaped her. Grant chuckled softly. "Deal. We'll find a safer stretch of highway, or maybe just fly to Hawaii next time. After all, the ocean is less likely to point a gun at us." He placed a warm hand on her knee, eyes flickering with relief. "We overcame. That's what counts." She smiled, started driving. As the road opened in front of them, she realized they had an entire future ahead, unbound by fear. The night sky above them felt liberating, dotted with silent stars. They'd conquered a slice of darkness, revealed a hidden evil, and come out stronger. In the hush of the drive, she recalled a final wisdom her mother used to quote: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Indeed, they were living proof, forging their path forward, together, heart by heart. The next morning, a warm haze covered the Tennessee sky, carrying the promise of a humid summer day. Roberta Flack stood by the safe house window, feeling the sun on her face through the light curtain, and tried to take comfort in its warmth. She woke earlier than Grant, who was still asleep on the small couch in the living area. Their unexpected entanglement with the local ring of corrupt officers had left them both drained, physically and emotionally. The FBI's dramatic late-night sting still lingered in her thoughts, a swirl of red-blue lights, shouts, and the terrifying moment when an armed officer Hicks grabbed her as a shield. She inhaled slowly, letting the memory fade. It was over. or so they told themselves. Hicks and Turner were under arrest. The FBI had secured enough evidence, and she and Grant had survived. But she knew that real closure was still on a distant horizon. She turned to see her husband stir from the couch, his tall frame unfolding as he rose, hair slightly tousled, wearing that same look of calm determination she'd come to recognize in times of crisis. "Hey, babe," she said softly, stepping toward him. "You slept all right?" Grant rolled his shoulders, testing for leftover tension. "Better than last night, though that's not saying much." He rubbed at the faint crease on his brow. "We made it through, though." He offered a faint, reassuring smile, but she caught the wariness behind his eyes. They both knew the threads of this case ran deeper than just two racist cops. "Lewis texted earlier," she told him, gesturing at the phone on the table. "He wants us to come by the field office again. Something about next steps. I guess we can't vanish just yet." Grant breathed out a long sigh. "All right, suppose we owe them a final debrief, and we should see if they need anything else from us. Then maybe we can resume our trip for real, or decide if we head home." She nodded, though a kernel of fear still gnawed at her. Those crooked deputies had threatened them so viciously. She'd spent the night repeating the old line her mother loved: "Fear is a poor teacher." She tried not to let it overshadow her sense of justice. "Let's get it done," she murmured, more to herself than to Grant. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and bagels provided by the safe house caretaker, they slipped into a loaner car. This time, no tinted windows. Lewis had suggested they keep things low profile, especially now that local criminals might be looking for them. She set the GPS for the FBI satellite office, feeling a ripple of deja vu as they approached the city. Only days ago, she and Grant had been naive tourists, ready for a weekend of scenic drives. Now they were embroiled in a federal investigation. Life felt surreal. They parked behind a discreet building across from the official one, meeting an agent in plain clothes who guided them through a back corridor. Roberta couldn't help noticing the tension in the agents' faces, like they'd uncovered something bigger overnight. The agent brought them to a different conference room, smaller, more secure. There, Agent Lewis waited with a stern expression. "Roberta," "Grant," Lewis said by way of greeting. "Glad you two are safe. We have new developments." He gestured for them to sit. Grant offered a tight nod. "We suspected as much. The arrest last night might not end everything, correct?" Lewis ran a hand over a folder on the table, frowning. "Correct. While we have Hicks and Turner in custody, our overnight intel suggests they're just part of a broader smuggling and extortion racket. This isn't just petty harassment. There's a pipeline of contraband funneling through these counties, with law enforcement collusion. Hicks was a small fish with nasty inclinations, but the bigger fish might now be alerted that the FBI is sniffing around." Roberta's stomach sank. "So, do we remain targets?" Lewis paused, face grim. "Potentially, because your testimony and Grant's FBI background triggered the sting. Word travels fast in these circles. The local ring might want revenge or to silence you, but we'll keep you protected. I promise." Grant's jaw set. "We're prepared to do what's needed." She glanced at him, uneasy. "I'm not sure how much more we can help. We did the sting. We were nearly shot. I'd like to go home." The frustration in her voice was unmissable. She was tired of living in fear. Lewis offered a sympathetic look. "I get it. And if you want to head home, I'll help arrange safe transit. But the reason I called you in is we discovered something else. Another corrupt faction is meeting soon, possibly in a neighboring county. We have reason to believe they might attempt to relocate any contraband or tie up loose ends." Grant folded his arms. "Loose ends meaning us or evidence?" "Both," Lewis replied. "We want to get the ringleader, possibly a high-ranking deputy or even someone in the sheriff's seat. We're short on agents who can pass as out-of-towners, though, and you two already established yourselves as tourists in the region." Roberta shook her head slowly. "You want us to keep, what, playing decoy? Isn't that too risky?" Lewis held up his palm. "We'd keep closer watch now that Hicks is in custody, but we suspect the bigger players might check out that remote warehouse or another stash location, see if Hicks left anything. If we can catch them with tangible proof, we can shut down the entire ring. If we don't, they might bury evidence and vanish." Her mind reeled. She wanted to be done, yet a flicker of righteous determination flared. The same sense that had propelled them to file the complaint in the first place. No one else should face these cops' terror. She looked at Grant. He gave her a look that said he was willing if she was. "Is it truly necessary to use us, though?" she asked more softly, scanning Lewis' expression. "Surely you have other decoys." Lewis sighed. "We do, but you two have that advantage of real authenticity. This ring knows you. They might believe you're still clueless or attempting to retrieve something from the area. If we send random agents, the criminals could sense a setup. Your presence is more credible. Plus, your husband, despite lying low about his bureau ties, knows how to handle himself if things go sideways." She bit her lip, remembering the near-silent skill with which Grant navigated trouble. She turned to him. "It's your call. You're the one with the background." Grant took her hand. "You sure?" Then he looked at Lewis, eyes hardened with resolve. "If Roberta is with me, we need absolute assurance of a robust backup. No slip-ups like last time where they nearly discovered the wire." Lewis nodded vigorously. "Understood. We'll coordinate a bigger team. More digital surveillance. They won't get a chance to corner you unprotected." He paused, then added softly, "But it's still a risk. Don't do it unless you're sure." She and Grant exchanged a long look. The tension swirling in the room pressed on her lungs. She recalled an old line, "One's moral responsibility is not to let wrongdoing pass unchallenged." She sighed, turning to Lewis. "We'll do it." Grant squeezed her hand. "We'll see this through then." "When do we start?" Lewis exhaled relief. "Thank you. We suspect they might act tonight or tomorrow. We'd restage a scenario, you two driving near that warehouse or a known route. We'll track you from multiple vantage points. If they show, we intercept." The plan set in motion quickly. A midday briefing with a small FBI squad, prepping for the operation. Agent Ray, who'd driven them before, would coordinate the ground units. The local sheriff department was mostly out of the loop, given they suspected infiltration among them. By evening, they'd set up everything. Roberta felt a mix of dread and adrenaline. She disliked returning to that warehouse zone, which had become symbolic of hate and danger. But if it ended the ring, maybe their ordeal would be worth it. She told herself, "We'll be okay. We have a full FBI net behind us." She repeated the phrase like a mantra, though her stomach churned. At sunset, she and Grant hopped into the same borrowed sedan, newly fitted with a discreet camera. They wore casual clothes, as though just another traveling couple, but under the seat lay a panic button connected to the FBI's channel. Agents in unmarked cars followed at a distance. The tension was so thick she could taste it. Grant placed a hand on her knee, silently comforting. She managed a tight smile. They drove along old farmland roads, the sky shifting to twilight. The plan was to pass by that same remote warehouse where they first encountered suspicious activity. If the ring had people left, they might appear. The route felt eerily familiar. Shadows lengthened, the hush of an abandoned stretch of road reminiscent of that earlier stop. Time crawled. They circled once, no sign of suspicious vehicles. Then on the second loop, a pair of headlights emerged behind them. Her pulse raced. She forced calm, continuing at a casual speed, hoping it was just a random driver. But the car closed distance rapidly. She flicked her eyes to Grant. He gave the slightest nod. "Stay normal." The headlights edged closer, nearly tailgating. Her heart hammered. In the side mirror, she glimpsed a large SUV, not a typical police cruiser. Possibly an ally of the crooked cops. She prayed the FBI would track them. Grant kept an ear on the hidden radio. She heard faint chatter from the team. "We see an SUV closing. Plate matches partial known associate. Wait for them to initiate contact." The confirmation made her stomach swirl. Suddenly, the SUV lurched into the oncoming lane, accelerating to pass them. But it slowed, aligning side by side, occupant glaring through the open passenger window. She glimpsed a heavy-set man with an unmistakable sneer, motioning for them to pull over. This wasn't standard police procedure. Fear spiked. She pressed her foot gently on the brake, guiding the sedan onto the shoulder. The SUV swerved ahead, blocking the lane. Grant's voice tightened. "We're being forced to stop. Everyone ready?" He kept his tone calm. The radio responded, "We're here. Don't panic." Roberta inhaled, parked. The SUV door flung open. A tall figure stepped out, someone different from Hicks and Turner. Meanwhile, the passenger also emerged, brandishing a pistol at his side. Not even subtle. A chill froze her spine. These men wore civilian clothes, but their aggression signaled real danger. She fumbled with the seatbelt. Grant whispered, "Stay put. Agents are moving in." She nodded, gripping the wheel. Through the windshield, the tall figure advanced, banging on the hood with his fist. She flinched. The passenger circled the driver's side, weapon half raised. They clearly had no time for pleasantries. Grant lowered the window an inch. "Something we can help you with?" he called, feigning casual curiosity, though tension laced his voice. The man glowered, eyes flicking to Roberta. "Yeah, you can get out of the car, hands where we can see them, right now." Her heartbeat thundered. This was the same script as last time, only no official uniforms, just raw intimidation. She looked for any sign the FBI was about to converge. Nothing yet. The tall man sneered. "We heard y'all been sniffing around, thinking you can rat on some good folks. That's not how it works." Grant shot a glance at her, then carefully opened his door. She did the same. If they refused, these men might escalate. The passenger brandished the gun menacingly. "Smart," he said, stepping forward. The tall man circled behind them, checking for weapons. She felt the same humiliating swirl of vulnerability as he patted her pockets. She seethed silently. He found nothing. Then they turned to Grant, rummaging more aggressively. She saw the flicker in Grant's eyes, that same flicker from the original stop. He was controlling an urge to fight back. But they had to stall until the FBI arrived. "You fancy yourself a hero?" The passenger spat, gun still in hand. "Those two deputies were our friends. Now they're locked up 'cause of you." Roberta realized these criminals were part of the extended ring, seeking revenge. The tall man hissed, "We got orders to deal with any meddling travelers. Y'all messed with the wrong crew." He aimed a loathsome glare at Roberta. "Bet you wish you never came to this state." She swallowed, ignoring the knot in her throat. Time dragged. Where was the FBI? They must be seconds away. The passenger stepped closer, gun pointing. "We can make you vanish. No one would find you." Grant inhaled, squared his shoulders. "You're making a fatal error," he said quietly. "I don't want to hear your mouth," the passenger roared, shoving the muzzle near Grant's chest. Her heart dropped. She almost screamed, yet she saw Grant's face, calm, calculating. This was the moment. The passenger pressed the barrel into Grant's shirt. "Say goodbye, buddy." An abrupt roar of engines shattered the tension. Headlights flooded the scene from multiple angles. The tall man spun, cursing. 3 unmarked FBI cars skidded to a halt. Agents piled out, shouting commands. "Drop your weapon!" The criminals whirled in frantic surprise. Roberta ducked aside, pulse pounding. The passenger swung his gun wildly, but an agent fired a warning shot overhead. He froze. The tall man raised his hands, stepping back. Agents advanced swiftly, disarming them. The passenger tried to toss the pistol, but an agent tackled him to the ground with a thud. She and Grant stumbled away, pressing to the sedan for cover. Chaos again, but this time it was mercifully short. Within moments, the men were cuffed, pinned against their SUV. The shriek of tires receded as the dust settled. She exhaled, tears threatening. Grant pulled her into a tight hug, heart hammering against her ear. Lewis emerged from behind the line of agents. "You all right?" he asked breathlessly. They nodded, still in shock. The criminals spat curses, but they were subdued, a muzzle pressed to their heads. Roberta's relief soared. Another close call, another rescue at the final second. She hated how precarious this all felt, but at least it ended with these men caught red-handed, brandishing weapons against federal witnesses. Within minutes, the FBI read the men their rights, searching the SUV. They found small packages in the trunk, likely contraband or hush money, enough to bolster the case. This ring was broader, apparently. She overheard an agent exclaim, "We've got logs of payouts, notes referencing Hicks's share." Indeed, tying everything together. Grant sank onto the hood of the sedan, burying his face in his hands for a moment, relief coursing through him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "We're alive. We got them." He raised his gaze, a shaky grin. "That was too close." Again. Lewis approached, handing them a sealed bottle of water. "It's over. We got the higher-ups now, or at least these men hold the link to the local boss. We'll unravel the rest." Roberta sipped water, her throat parched from tension. "So can we go home now? For real?" Lewis offered a gentle smile. "Yes, we'll expedite your statements, then you're free to leave. We'll handle the rest." The bigger fish might take time, but we have enough to cripple their operation. You two have done more than enough." She nearly wept from relief. They gave short on-scene statements. Agents took photos for evidence, searching the criminals' phones. Soon, they let Grant and Roberta step aside, a medic checking them for shock or bruises. The couple clasped hands, exchanging looks that said, "No more. Let's be done." By midnight, the FBI escorted them to a local station for final paperwork and eventually to a safer motel, free of shady corners. In that motel's modest room, they collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion pulling them under. She dreamt again of swirling lights, but woke with Grant's arms around her, anchoring her to the present. By mid-morning, they were summoned to the FBI office for a final round of sign-offs. The bustle of the day felt oddly normal after all the drama. Once done, Lewis shook their hands with heartfelt gratitude. "You two have done a great service," he said. "We'll keep you updated if we need more from you, but hopefully you can truly have your vacation or go home and rest. We'll keep your identity under wraps so you're not targeted again." He paused, meeting Roberta's gaze. "Sorry you had to endure such harassment. This is the unfortunate reality of some pockets of corruption, but thanks to you, we can start cleaning it up." She felt tears well. "Thank you for having our backs. If we can help more, let us know." Grant nodded, silent but resolute. Then they parted. Stepping into the bright midday sun, free at last, Roberta sighed. "So, Nashville or back to Raleigh?" Grant studied her. "Let's see if we can salvage the trip. Are you up for it? I don't want you living in fear." She inhaled, scanning the open sky. "We've come this far. Let's enjoy a day or two. I'm done letting them steal our peace." He smiled, relief in his eyes. "All right, let's do it, but a safer route, please." They found a scenic highway, charted to avoid the troubled counties. The drive felt calmer now, though she remained hyper-aware of vehicles behind them. Every so often, she flinched at a random car pulling close, only to relax when it passed harmlessly. Over time, the tension in her shoulders eased. She recited an old quote in her mind: "We can be fearful, or we can be free," reminding herself she deserved freedom from worry. Late afternoon, they arrived in Nashville, checking into a comfortable downtown hotel. The city's lively atmosphere, music drifting from bars, neon lights beckoning on Broadway, contrasted sharply with the ominous farmland roads of the past days. They exhaled, letting themselves appreciate normalcy. She insisted on a simpler dinner at a local barbecue spot, sitting outside, tasting smoky ribs and sweet tea. The hum of conversation around them felt like a soothing reminder that the world wasn't all fear and darkness. Over dinner, they talked quietly about how surreal it all was. "We basically took down a ring of racist cops," she marveled, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm proud of us, but I hate we had to risk so much." Grant reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "If we hadn't faced that traffic stop, others might keep suffering. We turned adversity into something worthwhile. That's worth remembering." She nodded, recalling another wise saying, "Out of adversity comes opportunity." Indeed, they seized the chance to stand up, exposing corruption. She sipped her sweet tea, letting the tang of relief settle deeper. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the city skyline. The next day, they finally engaged in a genuine vacation vibe, strolling through the Country Music Hall of Fame, sampling live music in small clubs, letting themselves laugh. Her body still held echoes of tension from the prior week, but each lighthearted moment chipped away at that burden. She realized how precious normalcy was. She clung to Grant's arm as they explored. They danced to a mellow band set, the guitarist crooning a soulful tune reminiscent of, ironically, the singer her name evoked, Roberta Flack. She chuckled at the coincidence, letting the melody ease her soul. That night, lying in the hotel bed with neon lights flickering through the curtains, she felt the first real sense of calm since the fiasco began. Still, the story wasn't fully done. They had to confirm with the FBI if they needed anything else. On their last morning in Nashville, Lewis called with good news. The criminals they helped catch had cooperated in revealing the entire ring. "We don't foresee any more danger for you," Lewis said. "They're rolling over on the bigger players. You two can head home whenever you wish." She closed her eyes, gratitude swelling. "Thanks. So we're clear?" "You're clear," Lewis confirmed, a note of relief in his voice. "If we ever require formal testimony in court, we'll let you know. But for now, go live your lives, and on behalf of the Bureau, we owe you." Hanging up, she relayed the news to Grant. He exhaled, shoulders sagging with a final wave of tension leaving him. "We did it," he murmured. "They can't haunt us anymore." She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. "Yes, we did. Let's pack up and head home tomorrow, okay? I need my own bed, my own routine." He nodded. "Absolutely. We've earned some peace and quiet." That evening, they shared one last celebratory dinner in Nashville, raising glasses of champagne, toasting each other, toasting the FBI allies, toasting the idea that justice can prevail. She let herself indulge in the tender moment, heart swelling with relief. They recalled the fear, the adrenaline, the nights in safe houses, the dramatic stings. Now they could let it become a memory, maybe a cautionary tale to share with friends when they returned, showing them the fragility of justice, but also its resilience. Early the next morning, they began the drive back to Raleigh, choosing major highways for speed and safety. Each mile carried them further from that nexus of corruption, yet she knew the moral lessons would remain with them. She felt changed, more aware of how prejudice can hide behind badges, more convinced that standing up is necessary. She also felt a deeper bond with Grant, forging trust under fire. As they crossed the state line, a sense of homecoming glowed in her chest. By late afternoon, they pulled into their driveway, a modest suburban house with a well-tended lawn. She almost cried stepping onto the porch, heart pounding with relief. No more safe houses, no more menacing stops, just the haven they'd built. In the days that followed, life resumed an odd normalcy. She returned to her job at a local marketing firm, answering coworkers' casual "How was your trip?" with vague references to some car trouble in Tennessee. She couldn't share the full drama, most wouldn't believe it. But behind that polite smile lay a quiet pride. She had confronted real evil and come out standing. Grant resumed his low-key routine, balancing his quiet private security consultations, his official cover for ex-FBI tasks, with the occasional phone call from ex-colleagues. She'd catch him sometimes staring off, reliving the confrontation. Then he'd shake it off, returning to the present with a soft grin. She recognized it as the aftershocks of adrenaline. A week later, a sealed envelope arrived from the FBI. She opened it, finding a letter from Lewis expressing thanks, confirming that Hicks, Turner, and the additional criminals faced multiple federal charges. A second sheet outlined how the Bureau would follow up if a trial required their testimony. She read it aloud to Grant in their living room, sunlight streaming through the window. A surge of gratitude for closure welled up. He wrapped an arm around her. "So it's official. We can rest easy. They'll pay for their crimes." She breathed out, letting the letter fall to her lap. "Yes, we did our part. Maybe no one else will have to endure what we did." She recalled an older adage, when one helps to unmask injustice, one paves the road for many. The sense of that empowerment warmed her. In the months that followed, daily life overshadowed the terrifying memory. Yet sometimes, while watching the evening news or reading about civil rights cases, she felt a personal resonance. She understood how deeply racism could infiltrate power structures, how crucial it was for people to speak up. She also recognized her privilege in having Grant's hidden connections. Someone without that might have faced tragedy. The injustice of it haunted her, fueling a desire to do more in her community. One quiet autumn weekend, she attended a small local forum on police reform. She spoke briefly, without exposing the full story, on how travelers can be vulnerable to discriminatory stops, how internal affairs must watch for patterns. The crowd seemed moved, a few approaching after to ask for more details. She gave them measured answers. Grant watched from the back, pride shining in his eyes. She realized a new purpose blossomed, bridging trust between communities and law enforcement. A modest step, but heartfelt. One evening, curled on the couch with Grant, she admitted, "I keep thinking about the younger couples or single travelers who might not have your FBI ties. They'd be at the mercy of those cops. We have to push for real accountability." He nodded, gently caressing her hair. "We will. We can share what we learned with folks in grassroots organizations or legal support networks. Even one voice can help." She nestled closer, content. "Yes, let's do that." We learned the cost of silence. Time flowed. Occasionally they heard from Agent Lewis, updating them on the indicted ex-officers. The trial might take a year. He praised their cooperation. She took comfort in that, imagining future travelers safe from that county's vicious game. She saw it as an echo of that old quote, "A single candle can defy the darkness." They were just two travelers, but they lit a spark that burned out a ring of corruption. Eventually, the tension fully subsided, replaced by a calm acceptance that they had changed a corner of the world. If a summons for testimony arrived one day, they'd handle it. Meanwhile, their life resumed, happy and stable, yet colored by a deeper knowledge of injustice. She found that experiences like these can simultaneously break illusions and strengthen convictions. On the anniversary of the fiasco, they took a short weekend trip to the beach instead of farmland. As they walked the shoreline at dusk, waves lapping at their ankles, she slipped her hand into Grant's. "I'm proud of us," she whispered. "We faced fear and overcame it." He kissed her softly, a gentle surge of affection. "Me too. We endured, we fought for what's right, and we're still here, together. That's the biggest triumph." She recalled an old line from a wise neighbor she had once known. "Strength is found not in how many times you stand up, but in choosing never to stay down." The memory shimmered in her mind. They could have crumpled under intimidation, but they stood tall. Night fell. They found a quiet spot on the sand. The hush of the ocean replaced the noise of sirens. She felt the old sorrow for those who might not have had the same chance. But she also felt hope. She squeezed Grant's hand. "We keep going, right? We keep shining the light we found. That's the only way forward." He nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "Always, Ro. Always." And so the swirl of tension from that trip receded into memory, part cautionary tale, part victory. She and Grant shared it discreetly with loved ones, using it to illustrate how vigilance and moral courage can triumph over bigotry. They learned that the path to justice is fraught with risk, but it's a path worth treading for themselves and for others. Time eased the nightmares, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. In final reflection, as she and Grant settled back into everyday life, Roberta penned a short essay for a personal blog, omitting classified details, but capturing the essence. We discovered that power, when corrupted by prejudice, can be terrifying. Yet we also discovered that even ordinary people, armed with truth and a bit of grit, can dismantle a chunk of that corruption. We refuse to let fear define us. Instead, we stand, hand in hand, forging a future where justice stands guard for all. She ended with a quote her father loved. "Justice is the bread of a people. They are always famished for it." Though they resumed quiet routines in Raleigh, she felt changed in a profound, irreversible way. She suspected Grant felt the same, having brushed closer to his old life than he ever wanted. But they had each other. They had done the right thing, and they were safe. That, as her mother used to say, was a blessing beyond measure. Thus ended the saga of the Roberta Flack couple, accosted by racist cops while on a simple vacation, only to reveal that the husband was an FBI agent capable of toppling the crooked. Their story served as a testament that justice, however delayed, can be ignited by those courageous enough to speak. And so they lived on, cherishing their bond, championing fairness in their community, and remembering that sometimes destiny calls us to stand in the line of fire so that others may walk free.